For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard and Mike here on Tuesday with something we're very excited about. We've got Margaret Spellings and her team in from the Bipartisan Policy Center. For those of you who are wondering about the bipartisan spirit, it is alive and well in Washington, D.C. and headquartered at the BPC. Margaret is an old friend. Many of you will know that she was in the Bush administration, 43, where she was the Secretary of Education and had a heavy influence on domestic policy. She was president of the North Carolina college system. She was president of Texas 2036, a great organization I'm pleased to be involved with, and then more recently became head of the BPC. The BPC is the kind of organization we love because we seek out these centrist, problem-solving, why can't we all get along, let's come up with an answer type organizations, and the BPC is absolutely one. She'll also introduce her colleagues a little bit, but I'll do just a hair of it. David Hill is here. He leads the energy practice at BPC. Energy is an important part of their efforts. David has a great background in energy, including being the General Counsel at NRG, and he's also on the New York ISO, so that might give us a little bit to talk about. Bill Hoagland is also here. Bill is going to talk about really the elephant in the room, which is the U.S. national debt, our spending, our problems, the way it has gotten way out of historical norms. He has a long history with that from having worked in Washington and on the Hill, and has some of the data that will alarm us, but also maybe spur us into action. So it's great to have you guys. Thank you so much for coming. Mike, why don't I see if you can get us teed up here, as usual, and tell us what's happening in the world.
Yeah, Maynard, today it looks like the Dow's up 300 or 400 points. Not really sure why it's up this much, but it is. And, instead of talking about just what's going on today in the markets, let's talk about what's happened in Trump's first 100 days in office. That is officially today. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Canadian elections. We'll also talk about the Spanish-Portugal power outages. As far as Trump's first 100 days in office, bonds, 10-year bond yields has gone from roughly 4.6% to roughly 4.2%. So that's down about 40 basis points. From a commodity standpoint, WTI prices is now around $61 per barrel. That's down $15 a barrel since he took office. Gulf Coast refining cracks, they're at roughly $24 a barrel. That's up 60%, which is pretty unusual because refiners are down quite a bit since then. Natural gas price, trades at roughly $3.45 an M. That's down about 40 cents, since he took office. Gold trades at around $3,300 an ounce. That's up 22%. COMEX copper prices are up around 10 or 11%. And Bitcoin trades at roughly 95,000, and that's down about 7%. As far as currencies, if you look at the US dollar versus a basket of global currencies, it's down about 6%. From a broader equity market standpoint, the S&P 500 is down about 6%. The NASDAQ's down about 10%, and the Russell 2000 is down about 14%. As far as the S&P volatility index, we've talked about that quite a bit. It's up around 50%, but it's down from its peak of on April 7th, which was around 275% increase in volatility. So it's up a lot, but it's come down quite a bit here over the last couple of weeks. As far as energy equities, the S&P Energy Index is down about 11%, with oil services the worst performer, down about 28 to 29%. E&P's down about 21%. Refiners down about 15%. U.S. oil majors down about 10%. Midstream down about 5%. And interestingly enough, alternative energy is up about 5%. And the last thing we want to talk about, and this is the electric utilities. We've talked about this all the time. They're up a little bit, around 2% since Trump took office. The IPPs and the power index, which has been a big area for the last 6, 9, 12 months, is down about 18%. So that's kind of a wrap of what has happened here in the first 100 days since Trump has been in office. As far as Canadian elections, obviously yesterday we had an election out there. Mark Carney's Liberal Party, they sort of eked out a narrow win versus Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party, but they still fell short of a majority in the House of Commons. So they're going to have to basically get others to work with them to get budgets passed and get legislation done. Now, I think the interesting thing about Carney is, he had his speech last night, basically his winning speech out there, And he talked about that the old relationship with the U.S. is over. I don't think so. I think that's what he needed to say. But I would think here in the next couple of weeks or months or whatever the case may be, he's probably going to be making it a number one priority to basically strike a deal with Trump on these tariffs. If he doesn't, that would surprise us. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is the Spain-Portugal power outage that happened yesterday. Which is interesting is like a week ago, Spain was basically bragging that they were at 100% renewables in their power stack. And yesterday, Spain and parts of Portugal, they had their largest blackout in its history. This should be a wake-up call, not only for Spain, the EU, but also the US. This outage is definitely going to be a wake-up call for the US, given that power growth is expected to be growing substantially through the end of the decade due to AI and bringing the manufacturing base back to US after 20 years of marginal power growth. Hopefully our discussion today will shed some light on where federal permitting is right now, where we are with loosening regulations. Is Congress acting? And do they know that this is an issue right now? I hope they do, because this Spain thing really, really is a wake-up call. If we want to dominate the AI world, if we want to dominate manufacturing like Trump says, there is no way we're going to do that unless we get permitting reform and unless we basically loosen some of these regulations. That's the key, and I hope our panel will basically help us discuss that and understand where we are on that front.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, let's jump in. Well, Margaret, thank you. We got to, we'll spill the beans here. We had dinner with you, your team, a number of friends last night, and started talking about this variable in the system called Washington, D.C., which is creating a lot of internal to D.C. and external to D.C. volatility, so to speak, but a lot of change. But welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Maynard. I'm thrilled to be here. Well, one thing you left out of my introduction is that I'm a proud Houstonian and alum of the University of Houston, so it's great to be home and in Energy City. My dad was in the energy business, and so very fond of what you all do here. So the Bipartisan Policy Center, someone said to me recently, what is that, and do you work alone? No, I do not. You might, by virtue of the headlines, think that there's really no comity or positive energy going on, but that's not the case. And I say, we're the only people in town with bipartisan in our name. And really, at the end of the day, good public policy can't be made without it. Period. Full stop. That's how we kept the government open a few weeks ago. That's how we're going to raise the debt ceiling. That's how we're going to extend tax cuts, because I think we all know with these very tight margins, you can't really rely on any particular coalition to get to the end of the day. So the details of the deal matter. Bill will talk about it, but this is a year that is all about fiscal policy, debt, deficits, energy, tax cuts, tax credits, and so on. And so that is the order of the day. We at the BPC really major in the majors of federal policy making. Jay Powell did a tour of duty along life's way, and at that, during his service, he invented the X date, which is the date that the federal government can no longer meet its obligations. And so we've become a little bit of an informal arbiter of that and have just released some work around it. So we deal in fiscal policy and energy and human capital and all the things about the quality of our workforce. Housing, another very key and central issue to federal spending and to the quality of life in our country, and health, of course. And so majoring in the majors, we curate groups of experts from across the spectrum, put people together in a trusted and confidential way, and grind through policy decisions. And then we have a lobby shop that tries to get stuff done on the Hill.
How big is the BPC, just people-wise?
We're about 130 people and about a $33 million annual budget on the C3 side and about 6 or 7 on the C4 side.
And I've learned this lingo. C3 is sort of the analytical side.
The nonprofit.
C4 is the let's go lobby somebody
Exactly.
side.
And there are distinct requirements around those things, because the C3 is policy, research, data, scholarship, those sorts of things.
Can we start? I got Bill right here on my right, and
that's appropriate.
You mentioned that's funny, and you mentioned the debt. I'm curious on the debt, because we all know what Washington talks about behind closed doors is not what they talk about on Fox. On Fox. But when you walk around Washington D.C., is the debt recognized as threat number one to everything we're doing, or would that be an aggressive characterization? Like, what is the level of tension around the national debt?
That's a good question, Maynard. I think for economists and for business people, debt can be a blessing, but it also can be a curse, of course. And I think it's not the top priority right now. If it were what they're considering right now in Congress, they would be doing something different, because the process that's underway right now, quite frankly, is not going to reduce the debt and deficits that we have going out. So it's a mixed blessing. We talk about it, we think it's important.
And it's up on people's radar. Is that fair?
It's up on their radar, but like I say, the actions they are taking in terms of controlling spending, or dare I say, extending tax cuts that will add to the debt, which I'm not taking a position on, that doesn't seem to be a problem right now for them. But it's hard to communicate why debt is important to the American, just to the average citizen out there. It doesn't come across as something that they think about, the public thinks about every day, I think. And unless you got the public support behind making the critical decisions they have to make, it's not going to be a top priority in Washington.
And, Maynard, they box themselves in with, you can't say we're not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, we're going to grow without, and so that really limits your ability to deal with the debt.
I was thinking, Bill, you mentioned last night at dinner something really interesting, which was just the process of the budget and how, your number, I'll mess it up, but it's been almost 30 years, I think, since we sat down and said, let's go line by line, or you characterize it, but the process sounds, not that it wasn't, this is not a shocker, but the process sounds particularly flawed.
Yeah, I owe my career in Washington, D.C. to what was called the Congressional Budget Impoundment Control Act that was enacted 50 years ago last year. And it set up a process that we thought would expedite the consideration and getting appropriations done on time. There's a separation here. When we say we haven't get our budget done, they're usually talking about the fact that what we call 1/3 of our federal budget is annually appropriated. And that's 12 appropriation bills. And that's the 12 that we haven't been able to get them all done since, I think, 1996 was the last time we got them all done on time. So we end up, like we're going to do again this year, we're going to end up with, we get up against it, we haven't passed them all, so we do what we call a continuing resolution. We just keep funding at the current level.
So just to put a fine point on that, you don't go into the line items of defense or education or anything. You just say, well, what did we do last year, and plus or minus X percent.
Generally, that's
usually
correct.
Plus. There's very little minus.
There are some adjustments that can be made in what we call a continuing resolution, but they're basically you fund at what the last year's level was. That's what we're doing this year. As Margaret said, we passed a continuing resolution here a month or so ago. It's at, quite frankly, the previous year's level for the rest of this year. And this for our fiscal year, the federal fiscal year runs out at the end of September. We'll have to go through this exercise again, and my guess is we'll end up again with a continuing resolution because the time is just running out here. We should have been putting these bills together back in January, to be honest with you.
Margaret, can I ask you, because we're going to get to David on energy, when you think of the areas that the BPC could get involved with, like these power alleys, where these are very important issues and we ought to be able to find consistent agreement. Is the debt, it's such a collective issue. Right. It seems like it totally lends itself to you getting involved. On the other hand, it is so hard. Is there a part of you that's like, how are we gonna, it's like putting someone on the moon from a policy standpoint. So what's your...
Here, the other side of the coin that Bill is talking about is the fact that the process is so stultified at the moment that they have not done any reauthorizations of so many different things that really would correct and update the policies that support the level of funding that you would need. So, I mean, the last time we did a higher ed reauthorization was about 20 years ago. Has higher ed changed in 20 years at all? I don't know, I'm asking. So, we've got this sort of old style policy stuff that is not in harmony. And so that is where all of a sudden the appetite comes in. So I'm going to give you one example. Short-term Pell, the ability to fund workforce training in ways that are more stackable, that are more tech-based, that are more manufacturing and so forth. We're limited. We have to, just the way you went to college at Rice, Maynard, we do it like that. But that's a place where, man, that's an updated kind of way, and it's going to need more reauthorizing to go with, because this thing is just rocking on in a status quo way.
I'm curious, Bill, on this seems like a topic, even though it doesn't lend itself to you need to cut this. It seems like a topic DOGE should attack, which is like, hey, you guys have a flawed budgeting process, and it's leading you to just continue stuff without evaluating it.
Right,
Like, is
exactly.
that, does DOGE come up in this context?
I think what you've highlighted is exactly what the problem is. Congress has not done its job. It's not authorized, it's not appropriated, and it's only appropriate that Mr. Musk comes in and says, listen, if you're not going to do it, let the executive branch do it, which sets up a little bit of a conflict right now. There are certain things that the executive has the power to do in terms of controlling those things that are under his jurisdiction. And yes, I think DOGE is important. Now, let's be clear. When it was first announced, DOGE was going to save $2 trillion. Then it became...
We call that the 3P in oil and gas. That was the potential size of the target.
And then it was $1 trillion, and he announced in his cabinet meeting a couple of weeks ago that he was down to $150 billion. There was a little bit of overstatement of how much you could do. And obviously, as we were seeing, a lot of the executive orders upon which Mr. Musk is taking his authority to make these changes are being challenged in courts.
But isn't that what you're talking about? The exaggeration, that's sort of a separate issue. But in Washington, it's like, well, it's only 150 billion. I mean, in Washington, that's a Ukraine war.
Yeah, but we're spending $6 trillion.
Yeah, I know, but then you get this circular thing where when it's so big you can't do
here,
anything about
150
it.
there, it starts to add up. Yeah.
I agree. I'm not.
I don't want to pick on you, Bill. You're a guest. But well, David, let's jump in on energy. We had the pleasure of meeting Sasha Meckler when he was running the energy effort. He's now at Exxon. What drew you to this? You have a really interesting background. I mentioned some of your power experience, but what got you excited about this? Because I bet you love energy, but I also bet your job's kind of hard some days.
Yes. Well, first of all, great to see you this morning, Maynard, and thank you for having me and all of us from BPC. So I wasn't actually planning on taking this job. As you mentioned, I was General Counsel of Energy. I served in the Bush administration as General Counsel of the Department of Energy, and when I first met with Margaret about this job, I said, well, maybe I'm a little long in the tooth to be taking this job, but Margaret talked me into it. I do think it's actually one of the things that, just to be honest about it, the reason I became a lawyer a long time ago, and that's now 37 years in the rearview mirror. It was just to try to, I thought it would give me the chance to maybe do something important that might be good for the world. That's it in a nutshell. And I thought at this point in life that maybe working on energy issues that are so important to our economy, so important to our country, and also being able to do them hopefully in a way where we can promote some good policy that's durable. And as Margaret was saying, really what can be done on a bipartisan basis really has the best chance of being durable over time. That it just seemed like the good opportunity to hopefully have a chance to do that.
Maybe we could pause on this, because this feels like this has risen in the business community to be issue number one. Even more important than some of these policy decisions is policy durability and predictability, and stop toggling around. Folks, let's keep it. What are you Let me ask that generic question. Is that on the radar of policymakers that whatever our choices are here, we need to stop moving things around?
Absolutely. And that will ultimately be a real motivator for the Congress to step up and do their job, because you can get whiplash from how we enforce, Title IX in one administration versus the other. Obviously, energy, many examples of that. Yes, we're green. No, we're not. And you all can't invest in that way, and certainty, prices, the whole, ball of wax. So yeah, you bet. And I think that is true throughout government, whether you're working in health or energy or education. And so yeah, it'll be a real motivator.
Have we? I think I know the answer, but you guys were in the W's administration. Has the volatility of policy truly gotten worse, or are we just
much more so?
That's our perception.
Absolutely, much more so. And think about it in foreign policy on the international stage. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to be our friend.
Yeah,
because you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out.
I'm still your friend, Maynard. Don't worry.
Well, I think, Maynard, the whole point about needing certainty and stability in the policy environment, it really is, and you see this in your business, how incredibly important it is. If you're going to allocate at-risk capital, you're going to make an investment. You need to know for a longer period of time than just a couple of months, a couple of years, 3 or 4 years, about how can you actually have some visibility. And that doesn't mean, it's not the same as saying you need to have certainty about everything that's going to happen in the future. One of my old colleagues at the Department of Energy would say anytime anybody was talking with great certainty about something that was going to happen, he'd kind of lean back in his chair and he'd say, well, there are no facts about the future. And of course that's true. And yet at the same time, you can look at the environment, the policy environment, and try to have stability about that so that you have a greater chance of being able to invest your money with at least a little bit more predictability about what's going to happen.
I guess besides policy certainty, certainly high on so many people's radar. The other topic, of course, David, has been power.
Yes.
And I think since we started Veriton, Mike, we were just stunned by the way in which power kept coming up in all kinds of contexts, the reliability, the costs it was having to working families in particular, what it was doing to industry, how it was causing industry to locate in certain areas, what it was doing to Europe. Right. And this is all pre-AI, right? And so I'll just throw that meaty ball right over the plate. And Mike, you jump in here. But what is the power discussion right now in DC? How would you characterize it? What do people think the problem is? And how does decarbonization fit into something which has so many other issues?
So Maynard, I think the power, what's going on in power right now, it's interesting how central it is to the discussion, not only in the energy business, but in terms of the overall economy. I think this is actually one of those issues where there are things that are going on that improve the opportunity for bipartisanship or a broad-based group to agree on some solutions forward. You look at what it is that the fact that with AI and the data center, and not only that, but increased electrification of buildings, new manufacturing facilities that are reliant on power. You look at the reliance of the economy on power is growing, and I think it's going to grow a lot more here in the next decade and a half. So what is important about the power system? Well, reliability, affordability, and environmental consequence. And when some of the time when I talk about that, people think, oh, well, is that code for climate? No, what I'm talking about is environmental consequence of all kinds. Criteria pollutants, NOx, SO2, I mean, the things, water, I mean, all the things that people care about. I think that what it is with the power system, you have to optimize for all of those. You have to actually figure out how you're going to meet all of those objectives all at the same time. And the way the power system works, it has to be met every single second. That's actually, of course, an incredibly complex technological problem. It's a complicated economic problem. It's a complicated legal problem.
I know we talked in the lead-in about the power outage in Spain and Portugal that happened yesterday. And I guess when I start thinking about the whole power issue, the thing I want to ask you is the politicians in D.C. I mean, is this going to be a wake-up call? I know it only happened yesterday, but I look at, we talked last night about the permitting,
Yes.
the growth in power is going to be basically 40, 50, 60% over the next 4 or 5 years. And that's comparable to the last 80 years of growth in the U.S. So the question is, are we going to be able to do that? Do politicians realize where we are in here, what the security concerns mean, what that means for economic growth, all these things? It seems like we need to be basically getting stuff done like yesterday. Where are politicians in Washington, D.C. right now? Are they ahead of the game? Or are they in the game? What do you think?
Well, so Mike, the outage that happened in Spain and Portugal yesterday, which again, I think just emphasizes the reliance that people have on the reliability of their power, of their electric power, and the fact that they want it there all the time. At least what I've read, they haven't yet figured out exactly what the cause was. They said there were some major oscillations on the system, but they don't yet know exactly what caused that. I think but again, it's just like any other time, and we've certainly had them here in the United States, where we had major outages, either weather caused or something else that caused a major outage on the system. And when that happens, of course, it moves right to the top of the public's agenda and the policymakers' agenda. And your question, which I think was, well, are people going to see that before we have one of those major disasters? I'm hoping the answer is yes. And a lot of what needs to happen on that is permit reform, is the ability to actually both modernize, upgrade, and build more of what we've got in the power system. And that's all it's all the way across the board: generation, transmission facilities, distribution facilities. And there's a whole variety of technologies that can come into play. I'm hoping that and I'm optimistic, actually, that within the next few months, we're going to see real action and legislative action on permit reform in Washington. And there are a variety. We can talk more about what specific kinds of reforms might be useful, and it does get complicated pretty quickly. But I'm optimistic that policymakers are going to see the need for that.
It's interesting, David. I feel like one thing we've observed around here is, pick any event you want. The terrible fires in Los Angeles, Winter Storm Uri, this Spain, Portugal situation. You pick it. The unfortunate thing is these things happen, and this is too broad a comment, but it seems like people just see what they want to see. Somebody sees, oh, it was totally renewables. And somebody else sees, well, it was totally because the gas was a problem. Or someone sees, oh, well, that's totally climate. And people don't slow down and say, okay, wait a minute, what really happened here? Or even California, it's bewildering to us. Mm-hmm. They seem to still not understand why they pay more for gasoline than any other place in the country. And refineries keep closing like this stuff. So how do you break through? I think this is something we talk about at Veritan. Energy's complicated. It's become politicized like everything. How do you break through that noise and try to show people the mechanics of these things so that we can make better policy choices?
Maynard, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we try to do at BPC and that we really focus a lot of attention on is education. Is getting folks together and try to promote some common level of understanding. In some respects, people will never sort of go out and publicly admit they're wrong. Getting anybody to ever admit that they were wrong or that they actually learned something, I don't know. People don't like to.
So we need to change the human condition.
Yeah, right. We need to change
we have a bigger challenge we've identified this morning.
Right. But I think that they and you see this, and just touching on something that Bill was talking about a little bit earlier. Some of the time, what people will say publicly and what it is that they will do in private are two different things.
Can I tell you, this is something we have found fascinating, particularly with this COPT, which we've been doing now for a long time, is a lot of people will say to us, I would never say this in public, but
Yes.
And then they say something which just totally makes sense. And you're like, why don't you say that in public? You know, and it's something like, I wish we had a gas plant. Or, you know, it's something like, this is not,
We need
why is
carbon
this
credits.
controversial?
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that I think when, and you touched upon this in your very first question for Margaret, when it comes to bipartisanship, some of the time I think that people think what that means is that you're going to convince people to give up half of what they believe in and then come to an agreement on something. That's not really what it means a lot of the time. What it means is that you're trying to come up with creative solutions so that people come to a common place, but for completely different reasons. And so that to me, that's the creativity, and that's the difficult part of coming up with some of the bipartisan and solutions and ways of going about coming up with really solutions to difficult problems.
Bill, yeah, you've got this face, because I'm thinking, the debt problem sometimes,
Well,
bipartisan means two babies.
Oh.
Like you get yours, I get mine.
Yes.
And
You
we
gotta walk
spend a
the
lot.
plank. You got to walk the plank together. You got to walk. I just an observation, having worked on the Hill for many years. I think what you're doing here is wonderful in terms of educating, getting the word out. I was there when they brought TV into the Senate, and one of our founders, Howard Baker, majority leader, was the one behind it. I've always thought that the members, they play to the camera. There's something to be said about smoke-filled rooms without all the public involved in it to get things done.
That's got to be our slogan for today's episode. There's something to be said for smoke-filled rooms. I mean, that's a...
I think to Bill's point, I mean, I think when the televising the floor proceedings in the Senate and the House, now what you actually have are you see speeches.
Yeah.
It's not that legislation doesn't go on, but it goes on in the cloakroom, goes on in private. And I just think it's one of those things, and just going back to something that we try to do, or we're trying to do here at the BPC, is get those folks together. Some of the time it's policymakers, some of the time it's staff, some of the time it's other stakeholders. It can be companies, various folks that have that are knowledgeable, and really try to grapple with the difficult problems, come up with solutions.
Wasn't there a proposal to eliminate, didn't somebody say, let's get the TVs out? Maybe that happens all the time, but wasn't there
It happens a lot, but I don't think it's going to. I think we've crossed the Rubicon. I don't think it's ever going to happen.
You know what else is really, in the time I've been involved, there's so much work that needs to be done to put policy together, to ask these complex questions, to surface the data, to get the real world effects and whatnot. And so groups like ours are the ones that are kind of doing the homework, because they're on the run. They're solving yesterday's crisis and so forth. Point one. And point two is, there are some weird things that often will precipitate, action. We're about to be in hurricane season. We're going to have some this year, I bet. And, how do we use the whole disaster conversation to precipitate conversations on better infrastructure and whatnot? And that's, obviously, President Trump has talked about abolishing FEMA. That's going to, we had some commentary about that last night. But those are going to call some questions that really present some opportunities for the kind of homework that we can do.
I think the thing that stands out to me is that when you turn on a TV, it's just like extreme, left and right. And I think about you guys, the BPC is, I'm thinking about how much bipartisanship is there versus, say, where we were 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. Who are those people? Is it give you confidence? Or is it as bad as it looks on TV?
Yeah, is it growing?
Yeah, no, it is. I'll tell you who they are. Katie Britt and Terry Sewell are working together on child care and paid family leave. Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, John Hickenlooper, Bill Cassidy. There are people who really are influential and work and are looked to solve the problem. Look, Ted Cruz, you're our Texas senator, huge margins on this deep fake pornography legislation that the president, I think, is going to sign today. So sure, there are. Now you have to have a little biteable chunk that starts in on what can get done, and then it can grow. We also have a program called ACE, where we bring members of both parties together, and they travel to each other's district. They learn a lot and try to foster those relationships.
I think we had the No Labels people on at one point, and they were talking about trying to increase the rewards to being bipartisan.
Yeah.
So I think that involved, basically helping bipartisan candidates raise money. I'm not doing justice to the description, but it was something to the effect of, do you guys think about that? Is there a way to highlight this behavior for the country and then those people get rewarded? Because right now you seem to get rewarded for your extreme views or your TV,
Number of hits
whatever
or
it
whatever.
is,
Yeah.
or your social media kind
Absolutely.
of way is.
And, it goes on in state and local government, more prominently, obviously. The Texas legislature usually passes a gigantic state budget, with wide bipartisan margins. And so anyway, yeah, that's part of our thesis too, is to elevate good behavior.
You want to highlight those people.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I'll say about that too, Maynard, is I think that some of the time when we talk about, how to come up with bipartisan solutions, it can sound too hard. It can sound like we've established, almost like you were talking about a minute ago. Well, okay, we're going to change human nature, or our objective is good government.
Yeah, we need. That was a rough
I
one.
think that instead it's the way that we certainly in the energy area try to approach it is we try to really approach it on really a smaller set of issues, a problem set, trying to figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve. What are a set of solutions? For instance, in AI and energy front, we don't sort of start out thinking, okay, well, how can we be bipartisan? What we start out talking about is what the problem is, what the issue is we want to address, and try to focus on it substantively, and then try to grow out from that to something where we can get a broad-based consensus.
I wanted to say, as Margaret said at the outset, we're the only organization in DC that has the word bipartisan. No labels, respect no labels, but let's be honest. We have two-party system. Now, maybe they're not as strong as they used to be, but partisan. Bob Dole and Howard Baker, who are founders, they were partisan guys. No question about it, as is George Mitchell and Tom Daschle. So I think we have to emphasize the fact that bipartisanship doesn't mean that we don't have strong parties out there to bring together ideas and differences of opinion that we can work within.
Are you guys struck by when you said Bob Dole, Howard Baker, George Mitchell, and Tom Daschle, those four animals? If they were in Washington, D.C. today, I don't know what you'd call them, but we
would be called rhinos.
Well, yeah, maybe rhinos. That's a good one. Yeah, it has a flavor to it that I guess we have less. Like there was a patriotism, a natural bipartisanship, even though they were partisan. There were some ingredients there that we need more of.
I think there were something we used to call first principles. And you're right, it's the problem. We've got to identify our problem. But we also have to identify, what are our common beliefs? Do we believe that children should read by the end of third grade? Do we believe that energy should be available reliably and affordably? Do we believe, is that even our thesis to start in on? And so those guys, and this is where leadership comes in, it's so critical, how elevate, what are our shared, creeds?
Can you, because we touched on this, I mentioned it up front, former Secretary of Education, a lot of initiatives under 43 in that area,
Like
No Child
energy.
Left Behind, et cetera.
Yeah.
But you shared last night some of the kind of the state of the nation and what's taken place over the last 20 plus years. Do you mind just sharing that with our audience?
Mind. It's my fondest thing to talk about. For about 16 years, all of Bush and all of Obama, we were using the federal role in a pretty muscular way, accountability, testing, transparency around data, and telling states, do something about that. And we were going in the right direction. Don't take my word for it, just look at the NAEP data. And then, way prior to COVID, Trump and Biden, we have been drifting, and we have now erased about 20 years of gain. But we know what to do, and we know how, we know if we focus on reading and basic subjects, the research that tells us how to teach little children to read, and we require people to attend to it for every kid, we can do it.
One of the things that's so interesting about Washington, D.C. is just the sense of priorities.
Yes,
And
exactly.
what is the goal? So was the Bush-Obama approach, fundamentally, they said the federal government's going to stay very involved and we're going to demand performance.
Well, and I wouldn't say this in public, but
Here we go. Thank you.
But Bush and Obama used the bully pulpit to talk about education, period. And that has not been true of Trump 1 or Biden in a way that is, features achievement for everybody, this kind of great equalizer and whatnot. And that's important in a place like Texas that's a majority minority state.
Bill, I was thinking about and David, the parallels between the debt problem and the energy problem, which is they both are this very quiet, decisions are being made somewhere. It's not going to show up today, next week, next year, even in the next few years. But then suddenly you have a blackout, or suddenly you have a debt crisis. So both of you are tackling public policy problems where nobody's paying attention day to day, and it's really complicated. And you're not even sure sometimes if you're a voter how to express you don't know how you're affected, right? So how do you guys?
It is a tough one because the analogy I use often is that the termites are out there underneath your porch.
Perfect.
And they're working away, you don't see them.
Bill, this is the second good tagline you've come up with for this show. The termites are out there under your porch.
At some point, though, you may walk out there on that porch and you may fall through. And listen, I've been at this a long time. I do believe debt and deficits matter. But as you say, convincing the American public that it's important, therefore convincing the elected officials to do something about it, it's not so obvious. But at some point, I don't want to be a doomer, but at some point, we're going to have a crisis in this country. Leon Panetta, who was on the Democratic side, was chairman of the House Budget Committee, who was CIA director, White House. When he was leaving Washington, he said there are two ways things get done in Washington. One is by leadership, and the other is by crisis. It's leadership that we need at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue.
What keeps you, this issue is so hard. I mean, this issue's been around for like the Reagan deficits. I mean, we've been talking about this forever. What keeps you going on this issue, like your own personal persistence?
My grandchildren, my children, I want to leave them a good future. And what we're doing by accumulating, this is a tax on future generations. They're going to have to pay for this one way or the other. And the standard of living in the future will be less because of the accumulation of this debt.
So one thing, you mentioned Margaret J. Powell started at BPC, or was early in his career at BPC. So, and when you guys go through the map, and you can't touch this, and you can't touch this, and you can't touch this, and that leaves this. There is one thing now that is huge, which is just the interest on the debt, which now exceeds the Defense Department.
Significantly.
Okay, so this is ridiculous. So it becomes this discussion about how do you get interest rates down? And, just to, the map in DC is like, well, we've got to do something about Chinese trade policies. We've got to do something about European contribution to defense and other, we got a lot of problems we're solving here. And you have this Trump v. Powell, this issue of, it's interest rates and it's also command and control. What do you think of interest rates? What's the discussion in DC around that piece of it, and how because the other thing that has come up, when interest rates were zero, we could have termed out a ton.
Yeah.
We didn't because whatever political considerations. But how about interest rates? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Bill should tackle that.
Bill, you're back in.
I'm back in here.
Interest rates.
The one number that I follow, and I'm not a great economist, but the one number I follow is the 10-year T-bill rate. And that ties directly to then what happens out here in the real world. And what was it, a month or so ago when those T-bill rates shot up overnight really was a factor that changed, I believe, Trump's decision as it relates to the tariffs. I think the the interest rates are a major factor in the decision process. And I want to hope, maybe be an optimist about this, that if that T-bill rate continues to spiral upward, there will be a major rethinking. Because after all, that sets how much we have to pay on the borrowings that we have, the $36 trillion that we have borrowed out there, that we have to pay interest on. When interest payments, which it is today, greater than we pay for defense or Medicare, that is a problem. That is a problem for the future.
And of course, inflation and prices, the other side of that coin.
Mike, anything you'd add on?
No, the only question I'd ask is, I mean, what was the budget in 2019, 2020? Just total in, right? The budget's like, what, 50% larger now? The debt's 50% larger, let's just say?
You're taxing my memory, but I focus on the deficits, the difference between the spending. And today we're running a $2 trillion. We spend about $6 trillion, and we take in about $2 trillion in revenues. Okay, so we got a $2 trillion. Back in
4 trillion in revenues, and with the deficit
it's $4 trillion in revenues and $6 trillion in spending.
So when did it become okay to blow through it by like 50%?
Well, the question I always got...
The factor that's driving this.
Yeah,
the factor that's driving this is demographics. Remember what we said at the outset. One of the major programs we have out there is Medicare, Social Security. That's a demographic phone. It's hard to stop not paying your Social Security benefits, as we know the president said, or Medicare benefits.
Well, that was a question I was going to say. It's like, I mean, if I was a corporate company, I mean, and I doubled my leverage, tripled my leverage, I would expect some growth to come with that. And what's happened is we've done that, and growth has not come with it because of what we're doing. And I hear a lot of people saying, you know what, why don't we just go pre-COVID back to those budget levels and everything will be solved? And your point is it can't, it's demographics is the issue.
And I would love to go back, but the demographics are driving us. As we say, those are the things that are the third rails of politics, touching Social Security, touching Medicare. There is, unfortunately, bipartisan support for those programs. And yet those are the programs that are driving. And to your point, they are consumption programs. They're not investment programs.
Exactly.
And that's where I think I call it the seed corner of the future. It's education, it's science, it's technology, it's energy, it's investments. That's where we squeeze, and that's where Congress is squeezing right now. On the investment side, we ought to be focusing on the consumption side, but that's the politics of.
David, let me ask you, if you could be czar, energy czar for a day or a week or more, what would be the one thing, if you could only attack one thing that you would change about the energy decision-making, policy, infrastructure? Like what would be your top of the list?
I'd probably have more than one thing at the top of the list, Maynard, but
well, give us a couple. That's okay.
Well, so just touching on something you said earlier when you were asking about things in connection with understanding about how the whole system works. The energy system we have in the United States, and I mean broadly speaking, I mean the electric power, oil, gas. We have really an incredibly reliable system. People have come to expect and assume that it's reliable. And I think the public should understand that the people who are running it, whether we're talking about grid operators or people involved in the companies, these are incredibly competent, hardworking people that are at it all the time. And I think they're the complexity of making that system work. People don't really understand it. The common person on the street doesn't understand it, but there are really competent, smart people who are running it. There are things though that it means that it has to be maintained constantly all the time, and things can go wrong. I think I guess if there were a couple of things that I would address, I would say the system is too complicated from a regulatory and a legal standpoint. Mm-hmm. A lot is spent on permitting delays, complexity, litigation that actually, I mean, we could wring out a lot of inefficiency in the system. I would also make the system more transparent in terms of what decisions people are making, what they're costing, and what people are paying. I think that there are a lot of hidden costs in the system. There are a lot of things where people don't really know what they're doing that are resulting in costs, and they don't know it. I would actually I would make the system much more transparent.
And do you think that's something that like Chris Wright and DOE could do? Was now the first one involves a lot of people, but at least in terms of the transparency, like here's what New York is paying for power, here's what California is paying, here's what Texas is paying, here's what Hawaii is paying, like, and here are the blends of these systems. Or is there is DOE the natural leadership for that type of stuff, or who should be the?
Yeah, so I think DOE could actually certainly take a big leadership position on that. I think that when we look at who's paying what, it needs to be made clear, why are they paying it? Who actually sometimes blame must be placed, right?
There's another great tagline.
And so it's important to know, why are these costs happening the way they are, and where did that curve start? And some of the time you can look at what the present situation is, but the reason why we are where we are is a decision that was made a long time ago in a different circumstance. And it's sort of like, if you can't just look at the current absolute level and think that you have an answer to the question you've asked.
Margaret, you guys have been great to come visit us. Dinner was so cool last night. Maybe a last question or two for you, which is, so I think those of us who don't live in Washington, D.C., we think part of the problem is Washington, D.C. is not connected enough to the rest of the nation. They don't go to enough Little League games.
Yeah.
You know, there's just a sense of like it's isolated.
Yeah.
What do you think that's a problem? And when you think about BPC and being effective, or how are you thinking about trying to be connected? You got to influence there, but you got to be connected out here. How do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think the bridge that can be built, and frankly is a motivator for the Congress, is to really talk about the real world effects of families and industries and costs, just like David said, because it gets very abstract when you just look at the math and this level of debt, and it's not personal. And so we have to really boil down the consequences, and that's what you're doing. That's what we're doing here today. And we need to do more of it. So what does it mean? Because, we're all going to have to, suck it up on some of these things if we're really going to solve these problems. If I ruled the world for one day, if I ruled the world for one day, I would say, our technology is so antiquated in the government. And I wish that Elon had come and said, this is a nightmare, and our systems are bailing wire and whatnot. But guess what? That would have cost more in the front end.
Yeah.
But then, we see the benefits as of course has been true in industry. So, I think we need to paint the picture of the implications for real families, for real people who are at the Little League game, and then, really upgrade and modernize our expectations on our systems in government.
Well, we love the work you guys are doing. We're all cheering for you. And we hope you'll come to us if there's anything we can help, particularly on the energy side. But Bill, as you keep fighting this debt fight, any ideas that you have for us to be useful? I know there's a community of people that really care, and it's just a question of elevating that issue in particular. So
thank you, Maynard.
Thank
We're
you.
thrilled to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody.